Welcome to the SMB Community Podcast with your hosts, Amy Babinchak, James Kernan, and Karl Polachuk. Produced by and for the Small Biz Thoughts community. We're dedicated to making every IT professional a successful IT professional. This podcast is sponsored by the Small Biz Thoughts technology community. Check us out at smallbizthoughts.org. Forums, templates, and checklists are just the start. Our community includes all of the best-selling books on managed services in all available formats, plus free training, members-only programs, and the best business training available to managed service providers anywhere. Plus, we have weekly, live, members-only Zoom calls. The average member saves more than 200% of their membership cost each year. We are totally dedicated to your success. Just because you're in business for yourself doesn't mean you have to go it alone. Join us today at smallbizthoughts.org. Welcome to another SMB Community Podcast. This is Karl, and I'm joined today by Anne Hall, who is an IT lawyer from New Zealand. She's the owner and founder of ITagree, the Agreement Lifeguard, providing legal agreements as a service globally. And her website is ITagree.com. Welcome.
Thanks, Karl. Great to be here.
So the first question is, so as an attorney, do you actually make any money off IT consultants? Because we're really cheap.
So what I've done is, with managed service providers, of course, they're providing amazing services. Of course, I find that a lot of them are passionate about the services that they provide, yet a lot are concerned about business risk. So while on the surface, things look good, underneath, a lot are concerned about business risk. And I really hate to see MSPs, struggling with unnecessary risk, burdened by unnecessary risk, and not really having a pathway forward to manage that risk, to deal with navigating change, and to protect their business. So that's where I, love to come in and help. And after 25 years as a lawyer, focused on the IT industry, I could see, clearly that MSPs were struggling with agreements. And so I went to Microsoft and I said, I would like to provide agreement solutions for partners and MSPs in particular globally. So sure, I'm a registered lawyer in New Zealand, but with ITagree, we're providing legal agreements as a service, okay, by subscription. So, right. Again, making it much easier. And there are a few key things that I think can really help MSPs to quite quickly reduce their business risk.
So risk is huge, and we'll come back to that. But let me ask the obvious question, which is, with the differences in laws, not just between New Zealand and North America, but, Canada, Mexico, all of Europe, Australia, Asia. I mean, the laws are different everywhere. So do you start by saying, tell us your location and we'll narrow down some of what we do?
Yeah, so it is a great question, and of course can be top of mind for people because of course you've got different jurisdictions. But when it comes to managed service providers, what the issues that really are relevant in terms of business risk. What's going on for managed service providers is the same in California as in London, as in Sydney, as in wherever you are. Okay, so if you look at a contract, a lot of partners focus on what I call the worst case scenario. And I need that contract there to protect me for that worst case scenario, right? But there's a whole other part of the agreement, which is I call the proactive protection side. And that is, what are you committing to doing? What are you expecting from your customer? What are the things that are out of scope, and all of that good material that really needs to be absolutely clear and concise. And that's the part that stays the same largely for managed service providers everywhere. And I find that, a lot of managed service providers, as I said, on the surface, things look great, but underneath is that business risk. And it's not that worst case scenario, it's the performance part. Now, in terms of jurisdiction, back in the 90s, when I began as an IT lawyer, right in the early 90s, in fact, we started having, clients. I was working at a big national law firm. We started having clients in the States. And what we would do is do a lot of the work here in New Zealand, but then submit the agreement to, the lawyer in the local state to
Right.
review. And what would come back was little or no change. Now, you got to appreciate that IT law is very, very new in the scheme of things in terms of, legal development. And so some of the areas, there are actually only a couple of areas that are really different. We work with attorneys in different locations to modify our agreements so that they're right for different places. Now, I've just been through that process with some of the European countries that we're entering, and even in a totally different, legal landscape there's still only a tiny bit of difference. It's actually not nearly as big as what you might think.
Good. Well, that's always good to hear. I teach a class on creating service agreements for IT consultants. And I always start by telling them your service agreement isn't about your service. It's about your relationship. It's about, how am I going to bill you and and when are you going to pay me and what's covered and what's not. And, it's sort of like, people never discuss the fence until there's a problem with the fence, right? So it's the same thing with agreements. When a client emails you and says, hey, can you send me a copy of our service agreement? That's not a good sign.
Not a good day. No, that's right. And I think, it's an important aspect as to what you're actually agreeing. And I'm a strong advocate of, your contract is, yeah, sure, it's there for that worst case scenario, but in 25 years, I'd only had 3 clients that had ever faced legal proceedings. And that's, I think, largely because of my focus on the proactive protection side and getting real agreement, right?
Right.
So, look, for most MSPs, their customers can see that they're, highly experienced and they trust them, right? That's why they hire them in the first place. Yet that trust is often also the cause of the problems that can come afterwards. And the sort of problems, that can come afterwards, when I talk about business risk, it's revenue leakage, it's out of scope work that you're doing, And so what MSPs need to really realize is that what's obvious to you is not obvious. It's far from obvious to your customers, So to overcome what I call the barrier of expertise, what's really needed is some simple translation in a way that customers can see, understand, and expect. So really breaking that down.
I really like I'm writing it down, the barrier of expertise. That's a great phrase.
Yeah, you got a big disparity there, between the huge knowledge and experience that the MSPs are bringing to their work relative to the customers.
Right. So we touched on risk, but let's go back there. So this is just such a difficult time to be in the IT business. The risks are almost doubling every day. We're under attack from trolls in Russia. We have ransomware going completely wild. Governments all over the world are regulating more and more, not just privacy, but access to data and reporting requirements and all of that. How do you keep up on that? How do you know that you're actually covering as much risk as you can in this service agreement?
Yeah, so the way that we write agreements, you got to pick out what's important, and you're writing it in a way that's robust enough to deal with different types of risk as opposed to every single risk, and I think that's really the experience of a lawyer coming through, and a lawyer like myself that's worked in the industry for 30 years now is really the way that you approach that in a way, as I say, that's robust enough to deal with the different types of risk. Now, we're working with MSPs day in and day out. And being in that capacity, we're hearing and seeing what's going on. And as I said, it's really those everyday challenges, partners saying, what can I do about this? Or this has just happened, or this new thing is, is this already covered? Well, we're not writing an encyclopedia here of different risks. We're kind of writing the agreements in a way that captures sufficiently well, the types of risks that are there, and when you look at it in terms of business risk, you have got, of course, that perhaps the cloud or the overhanging thing of, someone could sue you. You can't actually stop people suing you.
Right.
But, you can do a whole lot of things to minimize that happening. And, if you flick over to the proactive protection side of things, look at the sorts of things that are happening. Now, one of the things I've always focused on, and to tell this story, I'll jump you back to 1992, because it's at that time that I started my work as an IT lawyer. I was working for a big national firm at the time, and I was put onto the IT contracts for some really significant clients. There weren't IT lawyers around at the time, so I had to see, what's important here? What are the issues? What do I really need to focus on? And one of the things, that I really discovered quickly was the number of relationships involved in any of this sort of work, and once you see those relationships, it becomes much easier to determine where the responsibilities and the risks should lie. So that in itself reduces risk enormously once you can see that structure. Now, what I'm talking about for MSPs is, one risk category is, of course, they're busy reselling a lot of third-party cloud services.
Right.
Okay. And a lot of MSPs I talk to are concerned about that. Now, as I say to them, the vendors are not taking responsibility fully for their service. So why would you?
Right.
Let's be clear about that. And let's make that very clear to customers. So not just sliding that as a line item into your invoice, but here is your agreement for reselling third-party cloud services. That's dramatically going to reduce your risk already. If you, in contrast, if you come to them with an agreement that's to cover everything, and MSPs are providing quite a range of services, your customer will then have expectations. They'll make assumptions that you're really looking after everything, and that's a big arena for risk right there.
Right. Well, and I think 15 years ago we didn't make this distinction and say, I'm not responsible when something goes wrong at this tool vendor that I'm using to secure a client network, because stuff happens and it's completely out of my control, but the tool vendor has covered themselves with their agreement to me, but I haven't covered myself with my agreement to my client. So I think a lot of people's agreements, if they have them, are very out of date with regard to that.
That's right. Well, there are two aspects, of course, aren't there? There's the services you're reselling, and then, as you say, there's the services that you're using to provide your service. And and both of those are risk areas that really need to be addressed.
It's interesting because we used to sell programming. We did a lot of programming, and we always had a little area in there that said, we're not responsible for the tools that Microsoft or whoever, the tools that we are reusing. Those have to be fixed by somebody other than us, so we can't warranty those. And not only that, but I can license you what I write, what I create as a programmer. I can't license you the tools that I buy from somebody else. And I think there's an analogy to this, like I can't warrant a tool that I'm buying as a service from somebody else, and the client just needs to know that. Do you think that clients have pushback on this, or do they just see it as just it's regular business?
Well, I think that customers are actually quite relieved when they see an agreement that spells things out clearly, because a lot of the time they have had to rely on trust. And they're not necessarily wanting to raise their hand with questions, because that would show up their ignorance. Like, what do you mean you're going to migrate me to the cloud? What does that even mean? And so if something is laid out to them clearly, then it makes not only the MSP, look professional, and of course they're protecting themselves along the way, but they're making it very nice and clear for their customer for that real agreement, and customers can see, right, I'm getting that service from you. You're not doing that. I can understand why, because that's Microsoft or that's Datto or whatever it is, In actual fact, there can be, and I say to the MSPs that we work with, don't be nervous about presenting an agreement that says what you do. It's actually a good move, not only for yourselves, but for your customers. Position it as a benefit for your customers, that you're being transparent with them.
It's funny. I used to hear people say a lot, "Oh, I don't sign agreements. My customers trust me that if it's, if it's good enough for a handshake, it's good enough for me." And I'm like, okay, that's just silly. That right? Don't be stupid, right? Because they have no idea what the limits of their liability are.
Absolutely.
Speaking of liability, the other way that we manage risk is through insurance. So have you added sections to your contracts that sort of call out what kinds of insurance I have to have and what kinds of insurance my clients have to have in the agreement?
Well, mainly in relation to security services, yes, the customer, impose that on the customer to have insurance. But, it can be reassuring for the customer to know that you've got insurance. So we do put that in the agreements. If an MSP wants to take that out and not disclose their insurance levels, that's fine. And of course, shouldn't be confused with your limitation of liability, because your insurance is usually going to be far, far greater than what you should expose yourself to with any particular customer in terms of your, limitation of liability. So I have seen people trying to make those the same, and, well, I've got insurance, so of course I can have $5 million of, yes, but you're how much are you generating off this customer? So you don't want that disparity between those two things, in terms of, making things nice and clear and concise. One partner that we worked with, one MSP, Nick, he'd been bringing in customers for 20 years, things going quite well, but, under the surface, again, that business risk. And, he said, we don't have a problem with getting customers to sign agreements. It's only afterwards that the problems, commence.
Right.
And in fact, the team working late at night, Nick worried about, what's happening to his bottom line with that, because support requests coming in, and the team wanting to keep the customer happy. Now you've got an uneven relationship there. You have a one-sided relationship because things are not clear, so that is a part of business risk as well, if it's impacting your bottom line. Right now, what's needed there, of course, is for Nick to see, and he did soon see, that he needed a simple way to talk and walk his customers through what he is committing to doing. And once they have that, then you've got teams who are responding with greater confidence as to how they're going to deal with a particular, request, whether it's in scope or out of scope, or, how that works, whether they should be responsible or not. And, evening up the relationship so that customers are then saying, can you help us with this, rather than you need to help us with this. It's 8 o'clock at night. I've got a problem, and this sort of thing. So I think that you can turn the tables quite a bit, and not only the customer appreciative of things being laid out clearly, but that obviously reduces your business risk enormously.
Right. So I want to get into some of the details of the actual service that you offer, but let me give the website. So it's ITagree.com, and you have a bit of an offer, and we'll put a link to that. But why don't you tell us what the offer is?
Oh, sure. So the offer is, it's a download checklist, 8-point checklist. Just covering off on, some of the things, for your audience to have a look at their own agreements and to think through with the benefit of those questions. Am I protecting myself here? Should I be responsible for this? So it's an 8-point checklist. And, some of the things that we've talked about today in terms of the role clarity, the relationships and what you should be responsible for and not in terms of other parties that may be involved. The really what I call alignment of expectations, matching of expectations and getting that clear and concise. And the third part is, around, I call it agreement-driven decisions. So not that you're pulling out the agreement the whole time, but that the people that, who are receiving the requests in your team, are familiar with what's been agreed, and that's a really important aspect as well, because I've seen great agreements, but not actually implemented as such. So you get, let's say a delay on a project caused by a customer, but you had an opportunity to say, well, if there's delay, then, you know, we can still charge for our people, or because we can't just have them on the bench, or, you know, whatever it is.
Right.
So the avenues and the processes are often in the agreement if it's been done well. But the people at the front line, so to speak, need to know, you know, how to respond to those things.
Right. So it is itagree.com/checklist.
That's right.
And 8-point checklist, what kinds of things you might be missing inside of your service agreement. Okay, so in terms of the service, walk me through it a bit. So I log on as a partner. Is there a minimum? Do you charge per client, per MSP? You know, what am I signing up for?
Yes. So we've got a couple of plans, and, you know, typically people will book in for a call so we can discuss their particular requirements. There are a couple of plans that are set out on our site. Once they have agreements, they can use the agreements with all of their customers. We have plans whereby they can, you know, get guidance from us as well. We have forums for, you know, different types of agreements. So if you've got a question, for example, about, you know, reselling 365 under NCE, and you've got the agreement there, but you want to have, you know, there's a question that's been raised there, or, you know, you're setting that up for yourself and you've got a question, we've got forums for that. We have, you know, monthly sessions. We have, you know, plans with agreement updates. So basically it's just coming on. We've got a couple of plans. They can either have one which has got agreements, give me the agreements and I'll take it from there kind of approach with video tutorials, or if they want a greater level of assistance, they can have that too. So the first one is called the Rescue Hub, and the second one called the Beacon Bundle, in line with, you know, ITagree being the Agreement Lifeguard. So
if somebody gets just the first package, they download the agreements, do you let them change them? Can I download this and make changes?
They absolutely can, you know, so nothing is fixed in there. There are certainly areas that details need to be put into, but other parts of the agreement can be changed. It's, you know, as I said to one MSP I was talking to in the States this morning, actually, you know, you've got to be careful with agreements not to add chunks of, you think this is a good set of clauses to add in, because it's a bit like a puzzle, or, you know, a construction that, you know, you don't want to pull a piece out and make it unstable, or put a piece in and upset things as well. So they're very much built to be strong, stable agreements. There are aspects that need to be completed by the MSP.
So do you encourage people after they download these, especially if they make changes, that they then take it to their local attorney to have them look at it and make sure it's compliant and so forth?
Well, they can, if they have our Beacon Bundle plan, they can raise any questions like that with us. They could say, oh, I've seen this clause in another agreement. Would this be a good addition?
Right.
You know, and sometimes that very point is covered in our agreement already. They just haven't seen where that is. And I can say, well, have a look at, you know, clause 8.2, it's already there. And they go, oh, great.
Ah, very good. So if they get the Beacon bundle, then they can sort of have an ongoing relationship and just answer all the questions. Do you recommend that people roll these out to all their clients at once, or just start with their biggest clients and work their way down?
Yeah. It's a good question, because, you know, there's the logistics of that. I've answered a question in our forum on that very topic, taking, you know, go for the customers for which you've got no agreements in place. They're going to be like no obstacle to go and get an agreement in. But if you've got an agreement that, let's say, is, you know, 8 months through a 24-month term, then, you know, you need to look at that agreement to determine, can you introduce a new agreement? Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Do you need to wait till the end of the 24 months? Or could you have a conversation with that customer, positioning this as a benefit for them as well? You know, we've come along with a more enhanced and, you know, more transparent, clear agreement about what we're doing, and we'd like to, you know, end this agreement and begin this one. Now, you know, that has to be carefully thought about and managed, but it's possible as well. So we guide partners through that process as well.
So how often do you think agreements should be updated? Like if I sign an agreement with a client, should I sign it for a year with an automatic renewal, or 30 days with an automatic renewal? Or,
Yeah.
because some people are now saying, oh, you should sign 3-year agreements, but these MSPs don't want to sign 3-year agreements with their vendors. Why should their clients sign 3-year agreements with them?
Exactly. So it's a balancing act depending on the service, the client, a number of other factors. But you can have, if you've got a 3-year term, you can break it down 12 months, kind of auto renewing, with an opportunity to change things. Now, you can also identify things that might want to change, that you might want to change during the term. For example, price.
Right.
If there's an upstream price change, or keep it kind of generic. If it's endpoint protection, you don't have to name the vendor, so long as the performance and functionality you consider to be equivalent, you could swap that out. So you don't necessarily need to match your upstream vendor agreements with the term of your agreement with the customer.
Right. Well, and it also matters if it includes hardware that's got a 3-year warranty versus
Yes.
if it's just for services. Do you recommend that folks have more than one agreement with the client, or should they just try to put everything they do under one big agreement?
No. So the former. I mean, it's what I said earlier about the relationships, the role clarity. So you've got managed services, give them a managed services agreement. In that, if you're including, in your stack, you're reselling third-party services as part of your monthly charge, you need to really call that out, right? So yes, more than one agreement for the particular services that you're providing. That way you can put boundaries around the services. And also it helps you create upsell opportunities, because the customer can see, oh, I've got that service, and that service, but I don't have this service.
Right. Oh, that's a good idea. You can literally have, okay, we got 4 boxes and you got 3 of them you've got services for. So
Absolutely.
let's talk about box number 4.
Absolutely. Yes.
So very good. Well, we're basically out of time, but let me have you give a final pitch, have folks get a hold of you, and where should they go, and what's the first
Sure.
thing they should do?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been great talking with you, Karl, and I'd be very happy to help any of the MSPs in your audience. They can find me at ITagree.com, and that checklist again is at itagree.com/checklist.
Very good. Ann Hall, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate it very much, and we'll put all the links and the information in the show notes.
Thank you very much, Karl.
This has been another SMB Community Podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the SMB Community Podcast. If you found this useful, interesting, or fun, please subscribe, share with your friends, and give us a thumbs up on your favorite social media. Please check out the show notes at smbcommunitypodcast.com and give us your feedback.